Devante was 38 years old, a man whose life was measured in the reliable hiss of pneumatic wrenches and the deep, satisfying rumble of a perfectly tuned Cummins diesel engine. For the last 12 years, he had been a lead mechanic for the Minneapolis Metro Transit Authority, stationed at the sprawling Snelling Avenue garage. His salary was $65,842 a year, a number he knew down to the cent because he built his life on solid, quantifiable things. He believed in torque specifications, fluid dynamics, and the unwavering honesty of steel. He did not, until recently, believe in betrayal. That belief shattered on a Tuesday morning under the cold, fluorescent lights of a Hennepin County courtroom. His wife, Letitia, the woman he had loved since they were 24, the woman whose ambition he had always admired, was leaving him. But she wasn't just leaving. She was planning to scorch the earth behind her, to reduce the modest, carefully built life they had shared to a pile of ash from which she could sift the last remaining valuables. Her directive to her legal team, which he'd overheard during a clipped, furious phone call she thought he couldn't hear, was simple and brutal. Bring everything. Leave him with nothing. She had arrived that morning not as his wife, but as a corporate raider staging a hostile takeover of his life, and she had brought an army. Their life hadn't always been a prelude to war. Devante remembered the early days in their first apartment, a cramped one-bedroom over a hardware store in Powderhorn Park. He'd come home smelling of grease and exhaust, and she'd be at the small, wobbly kitchen table, surrounded by textbooks for her MBA program, her brow furrowed in concentration. He'd make dinner, something simple like black beans and rice, and they'd eat on the sofa, watching old movies on a 19-inch television he'd found on the curb and repaired himself. Her dream was the IDS Center, a corner office in one of those glass towers that scraped the Minnesota sky. His dream was a small garage of his own someday, a place where he could mentor young mechanics and listen to old soul music while he worked. They seemed for a time like compatible dreams. He supported her ambition with everything he had. He worked overtime shifts, taking the late-night repair calls that nobody else wanted, just so she could afford the best prep courses for her final exams. That overtime money, a hard-earned $4,700, paid for the navy blue Armani suit she wore to her first big interview. It cost $2,100, more than the down payment on his 2012 Toyota Camry. But when she walked out of the dressing room, her deep brown skin luminous against the sharp tailoring, he felt nothing but pride. "You look like you already own the place," he'd told her, and he meant it. She got the job. A junior analyst position at a downtown investment firm. Her starting salary was $75,000, and overnight, their world began to change. The first casualty was their apartment. She wanted a house, something in a neighborhood with good optics. They settled on a modest two-bedroom bungalow in Linden Hills, a 90-year-old house with good bones that cost them $380,000. Devante's grandmother had left him $25,000, which became the core of their down payment. He spent every weekend for a year fixing the place up. He refinished the original hardwood floors, a painstaking job that cost him $600 in materials and countless hours on his hands and knees. He rebuilt the back deck, board by board, a $3,000 project he completed himself. He planted a garden in the backyard, rows of tomatoes, peppers, and collard greens, just like his father had taught him. Letitia appreciated the house as an asset. "Good resale value," she'd say, tapping a manicured nail on the new quartz countertop he'd installed in the kitchen for $2,800. But she never seemed to see the love he poured into the place. She saw it as a stepping stone. While he was in the yard, his hands covered in soil, she was at networking events, her hand holding a $60 glass of wine, collecting business cards. The price tags of their lives began to diverge sharply. His favorite watch was an $89 Timex Expedition, reliable and unpretentious. Her collection started with a $1,200 Michael Kors watch, then escalated to a $4,000 Tag Heuer. He wore the same $700 Carhartt winter coat for 5 years. She bought a new $2,400 Burberry trench coat each season. When they went out for their anniversary, he'd feel a knot in his stomach looking at the menu. A $250 dinner felt like a massive extravagance to him. To her, it was a casual Tuesday. He tried to keep up, to understand her world. He read the business magazines she left on the coffee table, trying to make sense of terms like leveraged buyouts and capital acquisition, but it felt like a foreign language, and she was becoming a foreigner to him. "It's just business, Devante," she'd say, a touch of condescension in her voice. "You wouldn't understand." That phrase became her refrain, a wall she built between them, brick by expensive brick. The first brick in her final wall of betrayal was a quiet one. It was a Saturday in April, rain lashing against the windows of the Linden Hills house. Devante was in the garage, meticulously cleaning the fuel injectors from an old Metro Transit bus he'd brought home to work on over the weekend. He found the process meditative. He loved bringing order to complex systems. Letitia walked in, holding her phone to her ear. She was wearing a $500 Lululemon athletic set, though she hadn't been to the gym in months. She didn't see him in the corner. "No, I understand the optics," she was saying, her voice low and sharp. "The asset portfolio needs to be completely liquid before the formal filing. The primary residence is the main point of contention, but Sterling says we can argue marital contribution." Devante froze, the injector slipping from his greasy fingers and clattering to the concrete floor. Asset portfolio, formal filing, primary residence. These were not words from her job. These were words from a war room. She turned then and saw him. Her eyes, which once held a universe of warmth, were suddenly cold and flat, like polished stones. She didn't flinch. She didn't apologize. She simply ended the call. "We need to talk," she said. Her tone the same one she used to dismiss an underperforming subordinate in a board meeting. The conversation that followed wasn't a conversation. It was a pronouncement. She was leaving him. She had been promoted to vice president, a position that came with a $250,000 salary and a significant stock package. She had, in her words, outgrown their current domestic arrangement. "I see my life on a certain trajectory, Devante," she explained, standing in the middle of the living room he had so carefully painted. "And that trajectory requires a partner who operates at the same altitude. It's not personal. It's a strategic realignment." He felt the air leave his lungs. "A strategic realignment? Tish, this is our life. Our home." "It's a house," she corrected him, her voice devoid of emotion. "An asset. And I've contributed to its appreciation through my income. My lawyer will be in touch to discuss the equitable distribution of our holdings." She left that night. She packed 2 $5,000 Louis Vuitton suitcases with her designer clothes and moved into a corporate apartment at the Four Seasons downtown, where rooms started at $800 a night. She left behind everything else: the photos of them on the mantle, the small clay pot he'd made for her in a pottery class, the life they had built, or rather, the life he thought they had built. The first letter from her lawyer, a Mr. Alistair Sterling from a prestigious firm in the IDS Center, arrived a week later. It was printed on thick, creamy paper that probably cost $5 a sheet. The demands were breathtaking in their audacity. She wanted the house, its entire $450,000 equity. She wanted half of his pension, which he had been paying into since he was 22. She wanted him to pay her legal fees. And she was demanding $5,500 a month in alimony, claiming that her standard of living had been established during their marriage, and he was obligated to help maintain it, despite her new $250,000 salary. It was a declaration of total war. He sat at his kitchen table, the one he'd bought at a garage sale for $40 and lovingly restored, and felt a cold dread seep into his bones. He was a bus mechanic. He made $65,000 a year. How could he possibly fight a machine like this? He thought about calling her, about appealing to the woman he had married. He picked up his phone and dialed her number. She answered on the third ring. "Letitia," he started, his voice cracking slightly. "I got the letter. This is insane. We can't be serious." There was a pause and he heard her laugh, a short, dismissive sound. "Devante, please, don't be naive. You don't understand these things. Just have your lawyer talk to Alistair. It will be cleaner that way." "I don't have a lawyer, Tish. I can't afford a lawyer like that." "Well," she said, her voice dripping with manufactured pity, "that sounds like a personal problem. You should probably figure that out. I have to go. I have a dinner at Spoon and Stable." A $200 per person restaurant. Click. She was gone. The humiliation was a physical thing, a hot flush that spread across his chest. She was right. He didn't understand. He didn't understand how the person he loved could become this predator. He sat in the quiet house, the silence amplifying the ticking of his $89 watch, and felt utterly, completely alone. He had no idea what was coming. The cruelty was just beginning. A few weeks later, he had to pick up some of his tools he'd left at a friend's workshop in the North Loop. As he was walking back to his Camry, he passed by a sleek, modern restaurant with floor-to-ceiling windows. And there, at a table near the glass, was Letitia. She was wearing a shimmering black dress that he knew cost at least $3,000. She was surrounded by 3 men and another woman, all in immaculate suits, laughing, their teeth white against the dim, expensive lighting. They were drinking champagne. A bottle of Dom Perignon, $900, sat in a silver bucket beside their table. Letitia raised her glass, making a toast. She looked radiant, powerful, and completely at home. She looked over, her eyes scanning the street, and for a half-second, they met his. There was no recognition, no flicker of guilt or sadness. Her gaze slid right past him as if he were a ghost, a piece of the city's scenery. He was invisible to her. In that moment, watching her in her new world, he understood. She had already left him with nothing. Now she was just coming back to collect the debris. The rage that had been simmering in his chest for weeks finally cooled, hardening into something else. Resolve. Devante knew he couldn't fight her on her terms. He couldn't afford a legal bazooka. He needed a scalpel. He remembered a flyer he'd seen pinned to the bulletin board in the transit garage break room. Community Legal Collective. Affordable counsel for working families. The next morning at 7:15 a.m., he called the number. He was connected with a woman named Anya Sharma. Her office wasn't in a glass tower. It was a small, tidy space above a bookstore on Chicago Avenue, filled with thriving plants and shelves overflowing with law books. She was a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her 40s, with kind eyes and a handshake as firm as his own. She wore a simple pantsuit that probably cost $200, not $2,000. She listened patiently as Devante laid out the whole story, his voice quiet and steady. He showed her the letter from Sterling. Anya read it, her expression grim. "This is a classic shock and awe tactic," she said, her voice calm. "They're trying to intimidate you into submission. They're banking on you not having the resources or the will to fight back. They want you to capitulate before you even get to court." She quoted him her rate, $250 an hour, a fraction of the $1,200 hourly rate Alistair Sterling likely charged. "I still don't know how I can afford to fight this," Devante admitted, the weight of it all pressing down on him. "She's got the best money can buy." Sometimes, Anya said, leaning forward, the best defense isn't about money. It's about the truth. Is there anything else, Devante? Any agreement you made? Anything in writing? Anything at all? And then a memory surfaced, dusty and distant, from a time before the ambition had curdled into poison. It was about his father. His dad, David, had been a mechanic too, a man with grease permanently etched into the lines of his hands, and a deep, abiding skepticism of anyone who made their money with words instead of tools. He had liked Letitia, but he had never fully trusted her ambition. A fire that big, he'd once told Devante, you gotta make sure it's got a fireplace to burn in, or it'll take the whole house down. Shortly before Devante and Letitia got married in 2019, his father had sat him down. Son, he'd said, I need you to do something for me. For you. He'd pulled out a simple, 2-page document, a prenuptial agreement. It was prepared by an old family friend, a semi-retired lawyer who charged them $200 for it. The terms were simple. Any assets owned by either party prior to the marriage remained their sole property. The down payment on the house, which came from his grandmother's inheritance, was explicitly listed as Devante's premarital asset. Any increase in the house's value would be considered joint, but the initial seed money was protected. Devante had been embarrassed. Dad, this is Tish. We don't need this. His father had looked at him with sad, wise eyes. You don't need an umbrella when the sun is shining, son. You need it for when the storm comes. Just get it signed. If she's the woman you think she is, it won't matter. He remembered bringing it to Letitia. She'd laughed. Oh, your dad is so old-fashioned. She signed it without even reading it closely, scrawling her signature on the notary's page as if it were a birthday card. It was just a piece of paper to appease an old man. They had it notarized at a local bank, and his father took the original, placing it in his safe deposit box. There was more. A year later, his father got sick. Lung cancer from a lifetime of working around asbestos brake pads without protection. In his final months, he was obsessed with ensuring Devante was secure. He had a small but significant life savings, about $150,000 from a lifetime of frugal living. He set up a trust. This money, his father had told him from his hospice bed, his voice a ragged whisper, is for you. Not for a new car or a fancy vacation. It's foundation money. For your own garage, for your kids if you have them. It's for building something that lasts. He had a lawyer draw up a trust affidavit, a document that explicitly stated that Devante was the sole beneficiary and that the assets within the trust were legally shielded from any marital claims in the event of a divorce. It was his final act of protection for his son. Devante explained all of this to Anya. Her kind eyes widened, and for the first time a slow smile spread across her face. Devante, she said softly, your father was a very wise man. The next day, they went to the U.S. Bank on Lake Street where his father's old safe deposit box was located. The box cost $75 a year, a fee Devante had continued to pay out of respect. Inside, beneath his father's honorable discharge papers from the Army and a handful of old family photos, was a single, sealed manila envelope. Back in Anya's office, she carefully opened it. Inside were the 2 documents, crisp and perfectly preserved. The prenuptial agreement from 2019 with Letitia's looping, confident signature at the bottom, and the notarized affidavit for the David Johnson Legacy Trust. Anya read them both, twice. She looked up at Devante, and her smile was gone, replaced by a look of profound respect. We don't need to fight them, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. We just need to let them walk into the trap they've set for themselves. Her strategy was simple and elegant. They would not respond to the outrageous demands. They would not file counter motions. They would not engage in the flurry of paperwork Sterling's firm would inevitably generate. They would remain silent. They would let Letitia and her team believe they were running up against a scared, under-resourced man who was about to fold. "Let them rack up the billable hours," Anya advised, a glint in her eye. "Let them build their mountain of paper. We have one envelope. That's all we'll need." For the next 2 months, Devante played dumb. He went to work, fixed buses, and ignored the escalating barrage of legal threats that arrived by courier. Each one was a scene of escalating arrogance. He'd read the letters, each more condescending than the last, and feel a strange sense of calm. They were shouting into a void, completely unaware of the ground crumbling beneath their feet. He was no longer a victim. He was a strategist, waiting for the perfect moment to make his one and only move. The day of the hearing arrived. Tuesday, June 14th, 10 a.m. The air in the Hennepin County Government Center was thick with the sterile scent of floor polish and quiet desperation. Devante wore his best suit, a simple charcoal one from Men's Warehouse that had cost him $400 5 years ago for a cousin's wedding. Beside him, Anya Sharma was a picture of calm, her simple briefcase containing only a legal pad, a pen, and one plain, slightly worn manila envelope. Then they arrived. It was a procession. First, 2 junior associates, a man and a woman in their late 20s, both wearing identical, razor-sharp black suits that probably cost $3,000 each. They were rolling large black leather briefcases, the kind with wheels and telescoping handles that looked heavy with documents. Behind them was Alistair Sterling, a man who looked like he was carved from granite and arrogance. His silver hair was perfect. His pinstripe suit was a custom-tailored Zegna, easily an $8,000 garment. His shoes, black Italian leather, clicked with an expensive, authoritative sound on the linoleum floor. And behind him, like a queen with her retinue, was Letitia. She wore a severe, cream-colored pantsuit that screamed power and money. Her hair was swept back in an elegant chignon, and her face was a mask of cool confidence. She glanced at Devante, a flicker of something pity, contempt, in her eyes, before turning to Sterling and whispering something in his ear. He nodded, a smug smile playing on his lips. The combined cost of their legal firepower, Devante calculated, was at least $52,000 just to get to this one hearing. They had come to annihilate him. They took their places at the petitioner's table. The 3 lawyers arranged their briefcases, snapping them open with loud synchronized clicks. They began stacking files, thick binders with color-coded tabs, creating a literal wall of paper between them and the rest of the courtroom. It was pure theater, designed to intimidate and overwhelm. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Carol Williams, entered and took her seat. She looked at the mountain of files on Letitia's table, then at the empty space in front of Anya Sharma, and raised an eyebrow. "Mr. Sterling, you may begin." Alistair Sterling rose to his feet, a lion preparing to roar. "Thank you, Your Honor. We are here today to petition for the equitable dissolution of the marriage between my client, Ms. Letitia Reynolds, and the respondent, Mr. Devante Johnson. My client, a woman of considerable professional achievement and financial acumen, has been the primary driver of this couple's economic success. We have prepared extensive documentation." He gestured to the wall of binders, outlining Ms. Reynolds' contributions and establishing a clear case for the distribution of assets as outlined in our petition, including the primary residence and appropriate spousal support. He was about to launch into his prepared speech, a symphony of condescension about Devante's limited financial literacy and Letitia's dynamic career trajectory. But he never got the chance. Anya Sharma stood up quietly. "Your Honor, forgive the interruption." Her voice was soft, but but carried through the silent courtroom. Before Mr. Sterling wastes any more of the court's valuable time, we believe we have a document that will clarify this entire matter and render these proceedings moot. Sterling scoffed, an audible, arrogant sound. Your Honor, I highly doubt the respondent has anything that could possibly... Judge Williams held up a hand, silencing him. I'll be the judge of that, counselor. Ms. Sharma, please approach the bench. Anya walked forward. She didn't have a binder or a file. She held only the single manila envelope. She placed it gently on the judge's bench. The contrast was stunning. The mountain of expensive leather and paper on one side, and this one, humble-looking envelope on the other. Judge Williams picked it up. She slid her finger under the flap and pulled out the two documents. The courtroom was dead silent. The only sound was the faint rustle of paper as she unfolded the pre-nuptial agreement. Devante watched Letitia. She was whispering to Sterling, a confused, annoyed look on her face. What could possibly be in there? A pay stub? A bank statement? The judge's eyes scanned the first page, then the second. Her expression didn't change. She was a professional. Her face, a mask of neutrality. But Devante saw a subtle tightening at the corners of her mouth. She put the prenup down and picked up the second document, the trust affidavit. She read it even more quickly. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. When she was done, she folded the papers neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and placed it on her desk. She looked up over the top of her reading glasses, directly at Alistair Sterling. Mr. Sterling, she said, her voice flat and final, this is a notarized prenuptial agreement signed by both parties on May 17, 2019. It clearly stipulates that all premarital assets, including the $25,000 down payment on the marital home derived from an inheritance, remain the sole property of the respondent, Mr. Johnson. Sterling's smug smile vanished. His face went slack with shock. The judge wasn't finished. Furthermore, she continued, her gaze shifting to Letitia, whose face was beginning to drain of all color. This is a notarized affidavit for a trust established for Mr. Johnson, which explicitly shields its assets from any and all marital claims. Given these legally binding documents, the core claims of your petition, namely the ownership of the house and any claim on the respondent's future assets, are entirely without merit. She picked up her gavel. The petition is summarily dismissed. She looked at Sterling, her eyes cold as a Minnesota winter. Counselor, I would advise you to actually speak with your client and ascertain all the relevant facts before you waste this court's time with a three-ring circus again. Bang! The gavel came down. The sound echoed in the silent room. 6 minutes. From the moment Anya stood up to the final, definitive strike of the gavel, it had been exactly 6 minutes. Letitia's face was a mask of disbelief which quickly melted into pure, unadulterated fury. Her carefully constructed facade of cool corporate control shattered. Her head whipped around, and she stared at Devante. Her eyes were burning with a rage that was terrifying to behold. This wasn't the woman he had married. This was a stranger, a predator, who had just seen her prey slip from the trap. Sterling and his associates were frantically whispering, their faces pale. Their wall of binders was now a monument to their own expensive, pointless arrogance. They began to pack up their things, the clicks of their briefcases now sounding panicked and hollow. Devante didn't gloat. He didn't even smile. He simply stood up, nodded once to Judge Williams, and walked out of the courtroom with Anya by his side, the quiet victor in a war he never wanted to fight. The consequences for Letitia cascaded, not with a loud bang, but with the quiet, relentless finality of a balance sheet being reconciled. The first and most immediate was financial. Alistair Sterling's firm, which did not work on contingency for divorce cases, sent her their final invoice 2 weeks later. The bill for the services of 3 senior partners, their associates, paralegals, and court filing fees came to a grand total of $52,780. For a 6-minute hearing that resulted in a summary dismissal, she had paid them a $20,000 retainer, which was already gone. She was on the hook for the remaining $32,780. Devante heard from a mutual acquaintance that she had to liquidate a significant portion of her stock portfolio to pay the bill, wiping out nearly all of her liquid savings. The irony was brutal. In her attempt to take everything from him, she had lost a substantial piece of her own hard-won fortune. The professional fallout was more subtle, but just as damaging. News of the disastrous court appearance traveled quickly through the tight-knit legal and financial circles of downtown Minneapolis. The story was just too good. The high-flying VP and her 3-lawyer army, taken down by a bus mechanic with a single envelope. It made her look not powerful, but foolish, impulsive, a bad strategist. A few months later, a senior partnership position opened up at her firm, a role she had been aggressively lobbying for. She was passed over. They gave it to a colleague she considered her inferior. Her strategic realignment had backfired, branding her as someone with poor judgment. The social consequences followed. The powerful friends she had cultivated, the ones she'd been dining with at Spoon and Stable, began to distance themselves. They were attracted to success and power. And she had just demonstrated a spectacular lack of both. Her invitations to exclusive networking events dried up. She was no longer a rising star. She was a cautionary tale. Finally, there was the personal collapse. She couldn't afford the $800 a night Four Seasons anymore. She moved into a small, 1-bedroom apartment in a modern but soulless building in St. Louis Park, overlooking a highway. The rent was still a steep $2,200 a month. One evening, her first voicemail appeared on Devante's phone. "Devante, it's Letitia. I can't believe you did that. You humiliated me. You had that document the whole time and you let me walk in there like a fool. How could you?" Her voice was tight with anger. He listened, then deleted it. A week later, another message. "Okay, look, maybe my lawyer was a little aggressive. I was just trying to protect my position. You have to understand, in my world, that's how you operate. It wasn't personal." Pleading and justification had replaced the anger. He deleted it. The third message came late on a Friday night. Her voice was thick, and he could hear the sound of wine being poured in the background. "I'm sitting here in this box. I look out the window and all I see are taillights. I remember our garden. I remember how you brought me that first tomato of the season, and it was still warm from the sun. Why did you have that prenup, Dev? Did you never trust me?" The self-pity was palpable. He deleted it. The final message was the most telling. It was just a few seconds of silence, then a single, broken sob, and then she hung up. He deleted that one too. He felt a flicker of the old sadness, a ghost of the love he once had for her, but it was just a ghost. The woman he had loved was gone, replaced by this stranger who had tried to destroy him. Forgiving her was something he might do for his own peace someday, far in the future. But letting her back into his life? That was impossible. The door was closed, locked, and bolted 1 year later. The sun of a bright July Saturday streamed through the massive bay doors of the Snelling Metro Transit garage. The air smelled of diesel, coffee, and clean concrete. Devante wasn't on the clock. He was volunteering, leading a free weekend workshop for 4 aspiring mechanics from a local vocational school. They were gathered around the open engine bay of a decommissioned Gillig hybrid bus, their faces a mixture of concentration and awe. "Okay, so the key to the EGR valve is patience," Devante was explaining, his voice calm and authoritative. You force it, you'll snap the bolts, and a $30 job becomes a $300 headache. Easy does it. He watched as a young woman named Keisha carefully placed a wrench on the bolt. Her brow furrowed. He smiled. He saw his own younger self in her. He had kept the house in Linden Hills. It was his home, paid for with his labor and protected by his father's love. The garden was bigger than ever, producing an abundance of tomatoes, kale, and zucchini that he shared with his neighbors and co-workers. The house was quiet, but it was a peaceful quiet, not an empty one. It was filled with the sound of his old soul records and the projects he was always working on. Around noon, Anya Sharma's modest Honda CR-V pulled up. She got out, holding a small cooler. They had become friends in the aftermath of the court case. She'd stop by every now and then, ostensibly to discuss the final paperwork, but really just to talk. "Brought you lunch," she said, smiling. "Figured you and your team would be hungry." She had packed sandwiches and cold lemonade. They sat on the clean concrete just inside the garage, watching the apprentices work. The sunlight illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air, turning them into a golden haze. "You seem good, Devante," Anya said, taking a sip of lemonade. "Happy?" "I am," he said, and the truth of it settled deep in his bones. "I figured something out this past year. Letitia was always chasing a number, a bigger salary, a bigger title, a bigger house. She thought wealth was something you acquire, but it's not. True wealth is something you build. It's the skill in your hands. It's the knowledge you can pass on. It's the community you're a part of." He looked at the young mechanics, their heads bent over the engine, working together. He looked at the massive, powerful bus, a machine he understood down to its last bolt. He felt the solid ground beneath him. His father had been right. A fire that big needs a fireplace. Letitia's fire had burned out of control and consumed her own house. His was a steady, contained flame, warming the space around him, giving light to others. He had been underestimated, and that had been his greatest strength. He had been left with, in her eyes, nothing. But he had discovered that he already had everything that truly mattered, and that was more than enough.